You can't do this. That's community property. I'll have you arrested for theft. Her voice was a screech, sharp enough to peel paint. It echoed across the manicured lawns of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association, a place I unfortunately bordered but did not belong to. I just held up the freshly printed land survey, the crisp paper a stark white shield against her crimson-faced fury. I tapped a thick, black line that bisected the drawing. According to this survey, filed with the county this morning, the road you're standing on, the gate you just tried to lock, and the 10 feet of grass on either side of the asphalt all belong to me. I gave her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. So, if anyone's trespassing, ma'am, it's you. Now, I'd like you to get off my driveway. This, of course, was the end of a very long story. But it was, without a doubt, my favorite part. It all started 6 months earlier, when I just wanted to be left alone. My wife, Eleanor, had passed away the year before. The house we shared, the one filled with 2 decades of laughter and memories, had suddenly felt cavernously empty. Every corner held a ghost. I couldn't sleep in our bed, couldn't sit at the kitchen table without seeing her across from me. After months of rattling around in that mausoleum of a life we'd built, I sold it. I needed a clean break, a new foundation to build upon. The answer was my grandfather's old place. It was a 5-acre plot of land just outside the city limits, a little island of rural quiet that had somehow resisted the creep of suburbia. He'd left it to me in his will, a dusty, forgotten inheritance. The house itself was a modest 2-bedroom ranch, solid as a rock but dated. More importantly, it was surrounded by old-growth oaks and enough space to breathe. It was a project. A place to get my hands dirty, to build something new with my own 2 hands. It was exactly what I needed. I was a civil engineer by trade, specializing in land surveying and municipal infrastructure. For 30 years, I'd read deeds, plotted boundaries, and understood the unglamorous but ironclad logic of property law. It was a world of certainties, of metes and bounds, of steel pins driven into the earth to say, this is mine, that is yours. It was a comfort in a world that had suddenly become very uncertain. The property was an odd shape, a long rectangle with a narrow strip that connected it to the main county road. That narrow strip was paved, serving as my long, private driveway. On the far side of my 5 acres, a new, upscale housing development had sprung up in the last decade, Oak Haven Estates. It was a sea of beige houses with identical landscaping, all governed by one of those notoriously strict homeowners associations. My grandfather had always grumbled about them, calling them the Beige Brigade. I didn't care. Their world of synchronized lawn mowing and approved mailbox colors was their business. My property was my own, a sovereign nation of one. I put up a simple, rustic split-rail fence along my property line, more to define the space than to keep anyone out. I spent my days sanding floors and my evenings on the porch, listening to the crickets instead of the television. Peace. That's all I wanted. That peace lasted exactly 2 months. It was a Saturday morning. I was out by my new mailbox, which I had fashioned myself from a hollowed-out log. It was quirky, a bit of my grandfather's rustic spirit. I was admiring my handiwork when a golf cart, the kind you see on pristine courses, zipped up my driveway and stopped with a squeal of tires. A woman who looked like she was sculpted from disapproval and hairspray stepped out. She was probably in her mid-50s, dressed in crisp white linen pants and a navy blue polo shirt with a little HOA embroidered on the chest. "Good morning," I said, trying to be neighborly. "Is that thing your mailbox?" she asked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my creation. Her tone suggested she was identifying a piece of hazardous waste. "It is," I said proudly. "Made it myself." "I'm Karen Miller," she announced, as if I should already know the name. "I'm the president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association." "Nice to meet you." "I'm Mark," I offered a hand. She ignored it, her eyes scanning my property with a look of profound disappointment. "Your mailbox is not in compliance," she stated flatly. I chuckled. "Compliance with what?" "I'm not in your HOA." A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe disbelief, crossed her face. "All residents in this vicinity are expected to adhere to community standards. That log is an eyesore. It lowers property values." "Well, it's my property, and I like it. So I guess the value is holding steady for me." She produced a clipboard from her golf cart, a weapon I would come to know and loathe. Furthermore, she continued, her voice gaining a sharp, administrative edge, your grass is nearly 4 inches high in some places. The community covenant clearly states a maximum of 3 inches. I looked at my lawn, which was more of a meadow in progress. I liked the wildflowers. Again, not my community, not my covenant. That's where you're mistaken, she said, a smug little smile playing on her lips. The access road you use is maintained by the HOA. You benefit from our services, therefore you are subject to our rules. I blinked. The access road. She meant my driveway. The paved lane that ran from the county road, through my property, and then, I now realized, continued on to become the main entrance for the entire Oakhaven development. Ma'am, I said, my patience starting to thin like worn asphalt. This is my private driveway. It's part of my property. My grandfather built this house and paved that lane 60 years ago. Our records indicate it is a shared access point, and the HOA pays for its upkeep, including snow removal and landscaping at the entrance. We'll be sending you an invoice for your retroactive dues, as well as a list of violations you need to rectify immediately. Welcome to the neighborhood. She didn't wait for a response. She simply climbed back into her golf cart and zipped away, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust and self-righteousness. I looked at my log mailbox. I looked at my slightly shaggy lawn. And I looked down the long paved road that was, unequivocally, mine. A storm was coming. And it was wearing a navy blue polo shirt. The first letter arrived a week later. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock with the Oakhaven Estates HOA logo embossed in gold at the top. It felt less like a notice and more like a royal decree. The letter formally welcomed me to the Oakhaven community and detailed my list of infractions. The log mailbox was cited under Bylaw 74, Uniformity and Aesthetic Cohesion. The length of my grass violated Bylaw 92, Lawn and Garden Maintenance Standards. It also noted that the color I was planning to paint my window shutters, a pleasant forest green, was not on the approved palette of beige, taupe, or greige. Attached was an invoice for $5,000. It was broken down into a new member initiation fee of $2,000 and 3 years of retroactive monthly dues. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, a deep, booming sound that felt good in my chest. This was absurd. It was a bureaucratic fantasy. I took the letter, walked into my workshop, and pinned it to the wall with a rusty nail. It would be a conversation piece. My response was simple. I typed a polite, one-paragraph letter back to the Oakhaven Estates HOA. I stated, clearly and concisely, that my property, legally described as Parcel 7B, was not and had never been a part of their development. I informed them that I was not subject to their bylaws, would not be paying any fees, and considered the matter closed. I sent it via certified mail, a habit from my engineering work. Always create a paper trail. I thought that would be the end of it. How wrong I was. Karen, it turned out, did not view the world through the lens of logic and legal documents. She saw it as a kingdom, and she was its queen. My polite refusal was not a clarification, it was an act of rebellion. And she was not a monarch who tolerated dissent. The harassment started small. A week after I sent my letter, I found a notice taped to my front door. It was a final warning regarding my violations, with a new fine of $500 tacked on for failure to comply. The tone was no longer welcoming, it was openly hostile. Then, the anonymous complaints to the county began. I got a visit from a code enforcement officer about a junk vehicle on my property. The junk vehicle was my grandfather's old, but perfectly functional, Ford tractor, which I kept parked behind my barn. I showed the officer the property lines, he apologized for the trouble and left. A week later, it was the fire department, responding to a call about an illegal burn pit. I was sitting on my porch drinking iced tea. There was no fire. They, too, apologized and left. Then came the public shaming. Karen ran the HOA's monthly newsletter, the Oakhaven Acorn. The next issue featured a front-page article, thinly veiled, about uncooperative neighbors who leech off community resources and degrade the aesthetic integrity of our beautiful neighborhood. It didn't name me, but it described my property, the unsightly log mailbox, and the neglected, weed-infested lawn, in painstaking detail. I saw the neighbors from the HOA starting to look at me differently. The friendly waves I used to get when I drove out were replaced with suspicious glares. A few of them, emboldened by Karen's crusade, took it upon themselves to shout things from their perfect lawns as I passed. "Mow your grass," one yelled. "We have standards here," shouted another. It was infuriating. It was a buzzing in the air like static, a constant, low-level annoyance that was starting to spoil the peace I had come here to find. I was a private man, and this woman was making my life a public spectacle. Still, I tried to remain calm. I was a man of reason. I believed that if you presented people with facts, they would eventually have to accept them. So, I did what any engineer would do. I gathered more data. I drove down to the county records office. It was a familiar place, a library of deeds and plats that smelled of old paper and dust. I pulled the master plat for the Oakhaven Estates development, a huge, sprawling blueprint that showed every lot, every road, every utility line. And then I pulled the deed for my own property, Parcel 7B. I laid them out side by side on a large table. The lines were clear, stark, and beautiful in their certainty. The Oakhaven development was a neat, self-contained blob. My property was a separate, distinct entity. The border between us was as clear as a line drawn in the sand. And then I saw it. The road. The road they all used, the one Karen claimed the HOA maintained, the one she called a shared access point on the Oakhaven plat. It was labeled Oakhaven Lane. It ran from the development's grand entrance gate right up to my property line, and then it stopped. The plat showed a dead end. On my deed, that same stretch of asphalt had a different name, private driveway for Parcel 7B. It ran from the county road, straight through my land, and ended precisely where the Oakhaven plat began. My heart started to beat a little faster. There was no mention of an easement. No shared right-of-way. No legal document that gave the Oakhaven Estates the right to use my driveway to access their homes. For a decade, it seemed, they had all been trespassing. My grandfather, I recalled, had been a man of his word. He'd probably had a handshake deal with the original developer. "Sure, you can connect your road to my driveway. Just don't bother me," the developer, likely cutting corners to save a buck, never bothered to get it surveyed and recorded legally. They built a 100-home subdivision with its only access point resting on a verbal agreement with an old man who was now long gone. The whole community, this entire kingdom of beige, was landlocked. And I, the uncooperative neighbor with the log mailbox, owned the only key to the gate. I felt a slow, cold smile spread across my face. This was no longer about a mailbox or the length of my grass. This was about the fundamental laws of property, the very ground beneath our feet. Karen had been digging her grave deeper with every fine and every threat. She just didn't realize I was the one holding the shovel. And I was about to start digging. The turning point wasn't a single event, but a slow, grinding erosion of my patience. It was the constant glares from the neighbors, the whispers that stopped when I walked past the community mailboxes. It was the petty tyranny that had poisoned the very air I breathed. But the moment I knew I had to stop reacting and start acting came on a Tuesday afternoon. My daughter, Sarah, and her 7-year-old son, Leo, had come to visit. Sarah was worried about me, living alone after her mother's passing. Seeing them was a balm on my soul. Leo was a whirlwind of energy, and he loved the open space of my property. He was chasing butterflies near the split-rail fence that separated my land from the first Oakhaven house, his laughter bright and clear in the summer air. I was on the porch, watching him, a rare, genuine smile on my face. That's when Karen's golf cart appeared, materializing at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn on the other side of the fence. She didn't come onto my property this time. She just sat there, watching. Leo, in his innocent world, paid her no mind. He ran close to the fence, his little hands gripping the rough wood. "You there, boy?" Karen's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. Leo stopped, startled. He looked at her, his eyes wide. "You need to stay away from the fence," she snapped. "This is private property. We don't want your kind loitering." My blood went cold. My kind. A 7-year-old boy chasing butterflies. Sarah came out onto the porch, a tray of lemonade in her hands. She saw the scene and her face hardened. The old wooden boards of the porch groaned under my weight. "He's on my property, Karen," I called out, my voice dangerously calm. "And you will not speak to my grandson that way." She gave me a dismissive sneer. "You need to control your family. This is a respectable community. We have standards. We don't appreciate unsupervised children running wild near our homes." "He's not unsupervised," Sarah shot back, her voice trembling with anger. "He's in his grandfather's yard." Karen just sniffed, a sound of pure disdain. "If you can't abide by the simple rules of civilized living, perhaps you should move somewhere more suitable." With that, she turned her golf cart around and sped off. I looked at Leo. His face was crumpled, the joy gone, replaced by confusion and fear. He ran to his mother and buried his face in her legs. Something inside me snapped. It was a clean, sharp break, like a surveyor's rod breaking over a knee. This wasn't about me anymore. This wasn't about bylaws or mailboxes. This woman had brought her petty war to my family. She had made my grandson cry. She had crossed a line that was etched far deeper than any property boundary on a map. Eleanor and I had always taught Sarah that you meet ignorance with reason, that you turn the other cheek. But Eleanor wasn't here. And my cheek was raw from being slapped. That night, after Sarah and Leo had gone home, I sat at my grandfather's old oak desk. The house was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of a coiled spring, of pressure building. I pulled out the county plat maps and my deed. I spread them under the warm glow of the desk lamp. The lines, the numbers, the legal descriptions, they weren't just data anymore. They were weapons. My professional life had been about creating order, about defining boundaries to prevent conflict. Now, I would use those same skills to create a very specific, very targeted kind of chaos. This would not be a shouting match over a fence. This would be a project. A systematic, methodical, and legally airtight dismantling of Karen Miller's little empire. My plan began to form, a blueprint of poetic justice. I wasn't just going to prove I was right. I was going to make Karen's life, and the lives of her compliant subjects, so inconvenient that they would beg me for the peace they had so casually stolen from me. I started by investigating Karen herself. If she was this brazen about enforcing non-existent rules, what else was she doing? HOAs are, at their core, small governments run by amateurs. And small governments are often fertile ground for corruption. I spent hours online, digging through the HOA's publicly available documents. The covenants, the bylaws, the meeting minutes. They were all posted on the Oak Haven Estates community website, a testament to Karen's belief in her own transparency. It was a mistake. The financials were what interested me most. I downloaded the annual budgets for the past 5 years. I was an engineer, not an accountant, but I knew how to read a balance sheet. I saw line items that seemed inflated. Landscape beautification project, entrance, for $20,000. That was for a few flower beds and a new sign. Legal consultation fees, for $30,000 a year. Who were they suing? Or who was suing them? The most glaring item was under asphalt maintenance and repair, $50,000 every single year. For a single road, maybe half a mile long in total. That was an astronomical figure. My driveway, which was part of that same road, hadn't been repaved in 20 years and was still in better shape than most city streets. Where was that money going? I cross-referenced the HOA's list of approved vendors with state business filings. The landscaping company, Evergreen Designs, was owned by Karen Miller's brother-in-law. The law firm on retainer. The lead partner was her cousin. And the paving company, Superior Asphalt Solutions. It was registered to a holding company, but with a little more digging, I found the director's name, Daniel Miller. Karen's husband. My breath hitched. This wasn't just petty tyranny. This was a family business. A full-blown grift. Karen wasn't just a power-mad HOA president, she was a racketeer in a polo shirt. She was using the residents' dues to enrich her own family, overcharging for services on a road they didn't even own. The discovery of the road's ownership was the key. The fraud was the payload. I now had a two-pronged attack. One was legal, a matter of property rights. The other was criminal. I felt a grim satisfaction settle over me. This was bigger than I had imagined. And the fall would be so much harder. My quiet, peaceful retirement project had turned into a full-blown forensic investigation. And I was starting to enjoy it. The plan I formulated was simple in its elegance, a project I internally labeled Operation Driveway Freedom. It had 3 phases. Phase 1, establish undisputed ownership. Phase 2, restrict access. Phase 3, expose the corruption. Phase 1 began not with a letter, but with a surveyor's transit and a team of professionals. I hired a crew from a rival firm. I didn't want my own name on the initial work to avoid tipping my hand. I instructed them to conduct a full boundary survey of my property, with a specific focus on the driveway. I wanted every inch marked, every boundary corner staked with an iron pin and flagged with brightly colored ribbon. I wanted my ownership to be physically, undeniably visible. For 2 days, the crew worked. They set up their tripods and lasers right in the middle of Oakhaven Lane, my driveway. It caused a minor disruption. Cars had to slow down and navigate around them. I saw Karen watching from her window, her face a mask of pinched fury. She probably thought I was finally caving, preparing to build a covenant-approved fence. When they were done, a neat line of bright pink flags ran down both sides of the road, from the county highway all the way to the ornate brick entrance of Oakhaven Estates. The flags clearly showed that the entire road, the manicured grass shoulders, and even the precious flower beds Karen had spent $20,000 on, were all squarely within my property lines. It was a beautiful sight. The second part of Phase 1 was legal. I had my lawyer draft a formal letter. It was addressed to the Oakhaven Estates HOA Board of Directors, not just Karen. I wanted the other board members to know what was coming, to give them a chance to jump off the sinking ship. The letter was a masterpiece of polite, professional lethality. It began by referencing their previous correspondence regarding my alleged violations. It then stated, before we can address the substance of your claims, we must first clarify a fundamental matter of property ownership. It went on to explain that a certified boundary survey, a copy of which was enclosed, had confirmed that the road known as Oakhaven Lane was, in fact, a private driveway belonging to Parcel 7B. It politely requested that the HOA provide any and all legal documentation, a deed, an easement, a right-of-way agreement, that granted them the right to use this private driveway for access to their development. It concluded with a simple sentence, please provide the requested documentation within 30 business days. If you are unable to produce such documentation, we will have to assume none exists. I sent 5 copies via certified mail, 1 for each board member at their home address. No hiding behind the HOA's post office box. This was personal. Now, all I had to do was wait for the trap to spring. While I waited for the HOA's official response, I moved on to setting the stage for Phase 2. My property was now clearly marked. The next step was to monitor it. I was an engineer, not a security expert, but I was methodical. I purchased a high-end security camera system. Not the cheap Wi-Fi ones, but a professional-grade, hardwired system with night vision, motion detection, and crystal-clear 4K resolution. I spent a weekend running cables and mounting cameras. I placed one on a tall oak tree, giving me a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire length of the driveway, from the county road to the Oakhaven gate. I put another one focused directly on the entrance, capturing the sign, the flower beds, and the gate itself. A third was aimed at the side of my house, covering the area where Leo had been playing. The cameras were discreet, but not hidden. I wanted them to be seen. I wanted Karen to know she was being watched. Let her think it was about her petty harassment. The real purpose was to document what I knew was coming next, her illegal and unauthorized use of my property. Every car that drove in or out was now being recorded. Every resident, every guest, every delivery truck, all trespassing, all documented with a timestamp and high-resolution video. The 30 days passed in a tense silence. The pink survey flags fluttered in the breeze, silent sentinels of my claim. The neighbors continued their glares, but now there was a hint of confusion in their eyes. They could see the flags. They could see the cameras. Something was shifting, and they didn't know what it was. On the 31st day, a letter arrived. It was from the HOA's law firm, the one run by Karen's cousin. It was exactly what I had hoped for. It was arrogant, dismissive, and legally flimsy. It didn't provide an easement, because one didn't exist. Instead, it made a vague, blustering claim of a prescriptive easement, the legal equivalent of squatters' rights for a roadway. It argued that since they had been using the road for over 10 years without my objection, they had automatically gained the right to continue using it. It was a weak argument, easily defeated in court, especially since I had only owned the property for a few months. But the best part was the letter's closing. Furthermore, it read, "Any attempt by your client to impede, obstruct, or otherwise interfere with our residents' access to their homes via Oakhaven Lane will be met with immediate legal action, including a suit for damages and a temporary restraining order. We will consider any such action, including the erection of fences or gates, as a direct and malicious attack on our community." They were threatening to sue me for blocking access to my own land. It was perfect. They had just put their trespass in writing. They had admitted they had no formal easement and were now threatening me to ensure their continued use of my property. I scanned the letter and saved it as a PDF, placing it in a folder on my computer labeled Evidence. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now it was time to start closing the door. Phase 2 began the next morning. It was time to restrict access. I wasn't going to build a wall. Not yet. That was too crude, too final. I wanted to apply pressure, to make them feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. I drove my truck down to the entrance of the driveway, right where it met the county road. I had 2 large, professionally made signs in the back. They were metal, with reflective lettering, the kind a municipality would use. I dug 2 holes, mixed some concrete, and set the posts. The first sign read, "Private property. Parcel 7B. Road ends, no outlet. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." The second sign, which I placed right next to it, was the real masterpiece. It read, "Notice to residents of Oakhaven Estates. This road is private property. Access is temporary and may be revoked at any time. Use of this road constitutes acceptance of liability for any damages. For information regarding a formal access agreement, contact the property owner." It was a declaration of war, written in the calm, bureaucratic language of a zoning notice. It didn't block them, but it put every single resident on notice. It informed them they were trespassers on my land. It created uncertainty. It created fear. I was just finishing tamping the dirt around the second post when Karen's golf cart came flying down the road, kicking up gravel. She slammed on the brakes and jumped out, her face a thundercloud. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, pointing at the signs. "You can't do this. Take them down. Take them down right now." "Good morning, Karen," I said calmly, wiping my hands on a rag. My cameras were recording everything, capturing her meltdown in glorious 4K. "Just putting up some signs on my property. Making things clear for everyone. This is harassment. Our lawyer told you not to impede access." "I'm not impeding anything," I said, gesturing to the open road. "People are free to drive right past the signs. I'm just informing them of the legal reality of the situation. It's a public service, really. I will have you sued for everything you own," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I will ruin you. All of this is being recorded, Karen," I said, pointing a thumb toward the camera on the oak tree. "I'd choose your words carefully." That stopped her. She looked up at the camera, then back at me, her eyes filled with a venomous rage. For a moment, I thought she might physically attack me. Instead, she spun around, jumped back in her golf cart, and sped away, back into the beige fortress that was rapidly becoming an island. The signs had an immediate effect. The HOA's online community forum, which I had gained access to through a sympathetic resident, exploded. People were panicking. What did the signs mean? Were they going to be locked in? Or out? Why didn't the HOA have an access agreement? What had Karen been doing with their money all these years if not securing something as basic as the only road to their homes? The first crack in her armor had appeared. Her subjects were starting to question her. The first reveal happened at the emergency HOA meeting Karen was forced to call. The community room was packed, the air thick with anxiety and anger. The residents of Oakhaven, who had previously been content to follow their queen, were now a restless mob. My signs had worked better than I'd imagined. They had shattered the illusion of stability. I wasn't invited, of course. But my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, and I decided to attend anyway. We walked in and stood at the back of the room. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd as they saw me. Karen, standing at a podium at the front, glared at me, her face tight with fury. As I was saying, she began, her voice strained, "We are dealing with an aggressive and hostile action by an outside party." She launched into a tirade, painting me as a greedy developer trying to extort the community. He is trying to hold us hostage, to force us to pay an exorbitant amount of money for a road we have used for years. But I will not let this bully win. Our lawyers are confident that our claim of a prescriptive easement will prevail in court. A man in the front row stood up. A prescriptive easement. Our lawyer told me those are hard to win. Why was a formal easement never secured when the development was built? That's not relevant right now. Karen snapped. What's relevant is that we stand together against this threat. That's when Ms. Davies chose to speak. Her voice was calm but carried easily across the room. Perhaps I can shed some light on the situation. All heads turned. Karen's face went white. My name is Eleanor Davies. I represent Mark, the owner of the property in question. She walked slowly toward the front of the room, holding a folder. My client has no desire to be hostile. In fact, he has been trying to resolve this matter quietly for months. He is the one who has been subjected to harassment, false code complaints, and public slander, all orchestrated by your president. A low grumble went through the crowd. Ms. Miller is correct about one thing, Ms. Davies continued. My client does own the road. Here is a copy of the certified survey. She pulled out the large map and unfolded it, holding it up for everyone to see. As you can see, Oakhaven Lane is entirely within his property. What Ms. Miller is not telling you is that the HOA has absolutely no legal right to use it. A prescriptive easement claim is dubious at best, and would be costly and time-consuming to litigate, with no guarantee of success. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. My client is not a developer. He is a retired engineer who wanted to live in peace. He has no desire to hold you hostage. However, he cannot be expected to provide free, unlimited access to his private property for a 100-home subdivision, especially when its leadership has treated him with such contempt. Karen, seeing her narrative collapsing, reacted with predictable rage. She's lying. He's a monster. He's trying to destroy our community. He threatened my children. The accusation was so wild, so baseless, that it backfired. The crowd didn't gasp, they shuffled uncomfortably. They had seen me. I was just a quiet, middle-aged man. They had seen Karen's increasingly erratic behavior. Ms. Miller, my lawyer said, her voice dropping to an icy calm, I would strongly advise you against making false and defamatory statements. We have video and audio recordings of all your interactions with my client. The mention of recordings sent another shockwave through the room. Karen's face, already pale, seemed to drain of all color. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd met her, she was speechless. She had lost control of the room. She had lost control of the story. Her social credibility was cracking like cheap concrete. Her house of cards was collapsing, one card at a time. We left the meeting without saying another word. We didn't need to. The seeds of doubt had been sown. The residents of Oakhaven now knew they had a problem. And they knew its name was Karen. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Karen, stripped of her credibility in front of her subjects, became vicious. The petty harassment escalated into a full-blown, personal war. She had lost the battle of public opinion within the HOA, now she was determined to destroy me personally. She launched a smear campaign that made the newsletter article look like a compliment. She created anonymous accounts on local social media groups and began spreading vile rumors. I was a registered sex offender, she claimed in one post. I was a drunk who raced his truck up and down the road at night, endangering children. I was a recluse with a stockpile of illegal weapons. The accusations were insane, but in the echo chamber of a suburban Facebook group, they gained traction. People who didn't know me started chiming in. I always thought he looked creepy, someone should call the police and have him checked out. Then, she went after my livelihood. Even though I was retired, I still did occasional consulting work for the county's public works department. It was something I enjoyed, a way to keep my mind sharp. Karen found out. She started a letter-writing campaign, sending emails to the county commissioners and the head of the department, accusing me of unethical behavior and using my county connections to intimidate the HOA. She was trying to get me blacklisted, to poison my professional reputation. The most terrifying escalation came one evening. I was in my workshop when I heard a car pull up my driveway and stop. It was a police cruiser. 2 officers got out, their expressions grim. We received an anonymous tip. One of them said that there was a domestic disturbance at this address. Screaming, sounds of a struggle. I lived alone. "There's no one else here, officers," I said, my heart pounding. "You've been given false information." They had to check, of course. They did a walkthrough of my small house, their boots heavy on the floors Eleanor and I had picked out together. It was a profound violation. When they were satisfied that the call was a hoax, they apologized and left. But I knew. This was Karen. She was swatting me, using the police as a weapon of harassment. This was no longer just a civil dispute. This was dangerous. She was willing to put my life, and the lives of those officers, at risk, all over a damn mailbox and a strip of asphalt. That was the moment my resolve hardened from steel to diamond. My plan had been to inconvenience them, to force a reasonable negotiation. Now, my goal was total. I wasn't just going to win. I was going to remove her. I was going to burn her little kingdom to the ground. I needed more than a property dispute. I needed a silver bullet. I needed undeniable proof of a crime that would put her away. I went back to the HOA's financials. The key was the paving company, Superior Asphalt Solutions, owned by her husband. The $50,000 annual maintenance fee was the thread I needed to pull. I spent a week digging into every public record connected to that company. Permits, contracts, tax filings. And then I found it. A whistleblower. It wasn't a disgruntled board member or a brave resident. It was a man named Frank, who had worked for Karen's husband for 15 years. I found his name on an old work permit and took a long shot, tracking him down. He had recently quit the company, and when I called him, he was more than willing to talk. "That whole operation is a sham," he told me over coffee at a diner miles from our neighborhood. He was a tired-looking man in his 60s, his hands calloused from years of hard labor. Dan Miller's company hasn't paved a road in 5 years. He's got 2 guys on the payroll, and all they do is patch potholes for a couple of days each spring. The equipment. It's all rented. That $50,000 a year from the HOA. Maybe $5,000 of it goes to actual work. The rest is pure profit. Can you prove it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Frank nodded slowly. Before I left, I made copies. Invoices. Work orders. Bank statements. Dan was getting sloppy, leaving stuff on his desk. I knew something was wrong. I didn't want to be around when it all went south. He slid a thick manila envelope across the table. He was billing the HOA for a full repaving job every 2 years. Full crew, tons of asphalt, heavy equipment rentals. But the work was never done. He was submitting fraudulent invoices, and his wife, Karen, was approving them and cutting the checks. They were laundering the HOA's money. I opened the envelope. It was all there. The fake invoices from Superior Asphalt Solutions, listing phantom materials and labor. The corresponding check signed by Karen Miller. And the bank statements, showing the money being transferred from the company account directly into a personal investment account held jointly by Karen and Daniel Miller. This was it. Not just a civil matter. This was wire fraud. Embezzlement. A conspiracy to defraud the residents of Oakhaven Estates. This was a felony. Multiple felonies. I had the final proof. Armed with Frank's documents, I went to the only authority that mattered now. I bypassed the local police, who Karen had already tried to manipulate. I made an appointment with the Economic Crimes Unit of the County District Attorney's Office. I laid everything out for a young, sharp-eyed detective. The property deeds. The survey maps. The threatening letters from the HOA's lawyer. The recordings of Karen's harassment. And finally, the contents of the manila envelope. The detective listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he picked up one of the fraudulent invoices, comparing it to a bank statement. He was silent for a full minute. "Mister," he finally said, looking up at me. "You've done our job for us. This is one of the cleanest cases of HOA fraud I've ever seen." He told me they would open a formal investigation immediately. He asked me to continue as normal, not to reveal what I knew. They wanted to build an airtight case. They would subpoena the rest of the bank records and interview the other board members. And then he asked a question. "Do you think she'll call another community meeting soon?" A slow, cold smile spread across my face. "Detective," I said. "I can guarantee it." The final showdown was a thing of beauty. I engineered it myself. The final phase of my plan, Operation Driveway Freedom, was about to commence. I started by putting up a new sign at the entrance to my driveway. It was even bigger than the others. "Notice, this private road will be permanently closed to all non-resident traffic in 14 days. A gate will be installed on date. Residents of Oakhaven Estates will require a formal access agreement to obtain an access key." This was the spark that lit the final bonfire. The HOA forum went into absolute meltdown. People were trapped. Their property values were about to plummet to zero. They couldn't sell their homes. They couldn't get deliveries. They couldn't have guests. They were prisoners in their own beige houses. The fury that had been directed at me was now turned, with the heat of 1,000 suns, directly on Karen Miller. She had failed them. Her arrogance, her personal vendetta, had led them to this cliff edge. As I predicted, she was forced to call one last, desperate emergency meeting. She billed it as a community action meeting to combat corporate aggression. She was going to try to rally the troops for a massive lawsuit, her last stand. She sent out flyers, posted on the community Facebook page. She wanted a full house. She wanted a public stage for her final performance. I gave the date, time, and location of the meeting to the detective at the DA's office. He simply said, "We'll be there." The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed beyond capacity. People were standing along the walls, their faces a mixture of fear and rage. This time, I didn't stand in the back. Ms. Davies and I took seats right in the front row. Karen stood at the podium, looking haggard but defiant. Her husband, Dan, stood behind her, looking like a cornered rat. She began her speech, her voice shrill with manufactured outrage. "For months, we have been terrorized by one man," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This man wants to destroy everything we have built. He wants to extort us, to bleed us dry. He is the enemy." She went on for 10 minutes, her voice getting louder and more hysterical. She proposed a special assessment on every homeowner, $20,000 each, to fund a war chest for the legal battle ahead. The room erupted in protest. $20,000? Are you insane? You got us into this mess. When the shouting died down, I stood up. I had a projector and a laptop with me. "If I may," I said calmly. "I'd like to present a counterproposal." Before Karen could object, one of the other board members, a man who clearly saw which way the wind was blowing, said, "Let him speak. We need to hear everything." Karen was forced to cede the podium. I connected my laptop to the projector. The first image that flashed on the screen behind me was the survey map, showing my ownership of the road in stark, irrefutable detail. "This is the reality," I began, my voice steady and clear. "For 10 years, this entire community has been trespassing on private property. I have tried to resolve this reasonably. In return, I have been harassed, slandered, and my family has been threatened by your president." I clicked to the next slide. It was a still frame from my security camera, showing Karen screaming at me by the signs. The date and time were stamped at the bottom. I was called a bully for putting up signs on my own land. Click. A screenshot of one of the anonymous social media posts, accusing me of being a sex offender. I had traced the IP address back to Karen Miller's home computer. I was accused of being a danger to your children. Click. A copy of the police report from the false domestic disturbance call. Your president used law enforcement as her own personal intimidation squad. The room was dead silent. Every eye was on the screen, then on Karen, whose face had gone a ghastly shade of gray. "You're probably wondering why," I continued. "Why would she risk everything over a simple property dispute? Why not just negotiate a fair easement?" I wondered that too. So I looked into the finances. Click. The next slide showed the HOA's budget, with the $50,000 line item for asphalt maintenance highlighted in red. $50,000 a year to maintain a road you don't even own. It seemed high to me. Especially since the company doing the work, Superior Asphalt Solutions, is owned by that man right there, Daniel Miller, Karen's husband. A collective gasp went through the room. Dan Miller looked like he was about to faint. "And here," I said, my voice dropping for dramatic effect, "is where your money has been going." I clicked through the final slides. The fraudulent invoices. The cancelled check signed by Karen. The bank statements showing the transfers to their personal account. It was all there, a step-by-step presentation of their entire criminal enterprise. The silence broke. The room exploded in a roar of pure fury. People were on their feet, screaming at the Millers. "Thieves! You stole from us!" Karen, completely broken, grabbed the microphone. "It's not true," she shrieked, her voice a raw, desperate sound. "He faked those documents. He's the criminal. We needed that money. We deserved it. You people are so ungrateful for everything I do for this community." It was a full confession, screamed in a fit of narcissistic rage. And at that precise moment, as if on cue, the two side doors of the clubhouse opened. The detective and 4 uniformed officers stepped inside. "Karen Miller." "Daniel Miller," the detective said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You're both under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." Karen's meltdown was spectacular. She screamed, she cried, she tried to run. As 2 officers cuffed her, her eyes found mine across the room. The look in them was pure, distilled hatred. "You," she spat, her face contorted. "You haven't heard the last of this. I'll ruin you. I'll ruin you if it's the last thing I do." It was her final, impotent threat. A hollow echo in a kingdom that had already crumbled. As they led her and her husband away in handcuffs, the entire room of residents stood in stunned silence, watching the public, dramatic end of the reign of Queen Karen. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The community, liberated from its tyrant, began to heal. The remaining HOA board members resigned in disgrace, and a special election was held. A new board was formed, comprised of reasonable, decent people who were horrified by what the Millers had done. Their first official act was to draft a letter of formal apology to me. Their second was to ask, very politely, if I would be willing to meet with them to discuss a formal easement for the road. We met at my kitchen table. I served them coffee. They were humble, apologetic, and transparent. They showed me their plan to reform the HOA's finances and bylaws to ensure nothing like the Millers' grift could ever happen again. When we got to the topic of the easement, their lawyer began to talk about fair market value and compensation. I held up a hand to stop him. "Here's my offer," I said. "I will grant a permanent, legally recorded easement for the road to the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association." They held their breath. "The price," I continued, "will be $1. They stared at me, stunned. "There is one condition," I added. "The log mailbox stays. And no one ever mentions the length of my grass again." The new HOA president, a retired schoolteacher named Carol, actually laughed, a sound of pure relief. "Mister," she said, shaking my hand, "you have a deal." The fate of Karen and Daniel Miller was exactly what they deserved. Faced with a mountain of undeniable evidence and the testimony of half a dozen residents, they both took plea deals. They were convicted of multiple felonies. Dan got 3 years in state prison. Karen, as the mastermind and abuser of a position of public trust, got 5. They were ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which bankrupted them. Their house, the castle of their little kingdom, was sold at auction to cover their debts and legal fees. They lost everything, their money, their freedom, their social standing. They became a local cautionary tale, a story whispered at neighborhood barbecues about the HOA president who flew too close to the sun. As for me, I finally got what I had wanted from the very beginning. Peace. The gate I had threatened to build was never constructed. The new signs came down, replaced by a simple, elegant Oakhaven Estate sign, which the new board politely asked my permission to place on my property. My log mailbox became something of a local landmark, a quiet symbol of the victory of reason over tyranny. The community next door changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a genuine sense of neighborliness. People started waving again. Carol, the new president, would sometimes stop by with a pie. We'd chat on the porch. We never talked about Karen. We didn't have to. I finished the renovations on my grandfather's house. I painted the shutters the deep forest green I'd always wanted. I let the wildflowers grow in the lawn. I sat on my porch in the evenings, listening to the crickets, and watched the cars of my neighbors drive peacefully down my road, their right of passage secured not by threats or intimidation, but by a simple act of decency. I had never set out to be a hero or a giant slayer. I was just a man who wanted to be left alone to grieve and to build a new life on the foundations of the old. But I learned that sometimes, protecting your peace requires you to go to war. You have to stand up to the bullies, not just for yourself, but for everyone they torment. There is a profound satisfaction in seeing justice done, in watching a carefully constructed plan come together to deliver a consequence that is not just legal, but poetic. My grandfather's property was safe. My family's legacy was secure. And my home, my little 5-acre kingdom, was finally, truly, quiet. And that was the greatest victory of all.